Your feedback coming in so fast. I can see Maura Murira saying, and if yes, if ODM wants to be in the opposition, they should win the presidency. It's simple that way. Thank you, Maura, for your feedback. Let's go to Dar es Salaam and link up with Mark Bichachi. Bichachi, of course, we've seen that question from our viewer who said that ODM has to be in opposition, so that then it's a problem when ODM joins government. And how important also, of course, is it for personalities and persons like the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, who has occupied a certain position historically of opposition, to move to AUC and to create the democratic space for opposition in the country, because that seems to be also something that Parliament, which is entrusted the role of checking the executive in the Constitution, seems to have taken a different angle altogether.
Well, that's a very excellent question. And one of the things is I absolutely do not think that Kenya has taken a step back democratically. And the reason why I don't think so is because, one, what we've done this year is we've stretched and tested our democratic capacity. We've tested our capacity to picket. We've tested our capacity to impeach a deputy president. We've tested our capacity to remain without a budget for almost 6 months now. We've had very many landmark cases in court, some that have quashed some of the biggest issues happening in the country. So Kenya is not at a place where it's in democratic doldrums. The problem is that this country has equated opposition to the person of Raila Odinga, and Raila Odinga to the very epitome and personalization of what opposition is. Yet this country forgets there are people like Martha Karua who every day are doing opposition work. We have people like Kalonzo Musyoka who every day are doing opposition work. So when we say that opposition has been swallowed, that's not quite the case. The case is only that Raila Odinga has finally done what any great leader does, which is step above so that the people who are under him can grow. So the issue is not the lack of a democratic space, it is the lack of leadership that is not stepping up to the plate to where Raila Odinga is. And Raila Odinga is at a good place because if he becomes AU chair, then he gets to a place where his career ends with great accolades, having achieved a lot more than even presidents have achieved in their lifetime. Now, that being said, we must understand that Kenya is a country in transition. All of the KANU boys are almost at the sunset of their political careers. The question we must begin to ask ourselves as a country is, what is the kind of politician and what is the kind of politics and who is the kind of activist we need in future? Because what is happening is, as Raila Odinga exits and as different voices emerge, one of the communication gaps that has become is that the people feel like there is no voice that is equal and opposite to the person of the presidency. So what needs to happen is, as transition happens, we need to get leadership who are capable and up to the task, not in terms of just speaking, but in terms of carrying virtue, expectations, and hopes of the people, in terms of being a proper counterweight to the ruling coalition. That is the true question. However, democracy in Kenya is not in trouble. I think the government of Kenya handled the Gen Z protests very well, and the Gen Z protests actually held the government to account very well. The only issue, of course, is the issue of abductions and missing people. That is a serious issue that still needs to be addressed. But honestly, how Kenya came out of it, we came out of it better for it. And the proof is, you can see that we now have a president who's listening to the people, a president who actually is, during his State of the Nation address, had to roll back Adani, and that is a big step forward.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Maliba, now when you look at these whole conversations on running government, there are those who have opined that it seems to be, whereas you're calling for conversations, this same electorate is the one you convinced to vote you in a majority. Why would they then go back against and criticize and have a different opinion to how you're running government? And whereas you've talked about, listening and communicating and talking to each other as a country, how far can such a plea go to for a young people that are now looking forward to perhaps getting the jobs that the government is advertising for? We've seen what even CS Muto has posted, I think 5 minutes ago, 10,000 more are required. Is that the way to go? Is that modern day administration and running perhaps the promises of, for instance, job creation?
The Kenya Kwanza administration has actually decided to go hands-on on everything. Kenya is about 61 years old, at least post-independence, but of course Kenya has always been here.
Yes.
Whatever we have was not built in a single day. Even TV47 is not an idea that was built in a single day. It takes much more than one financial year to build some of these things. But then even as I respond to that, I would love to actually ask a general question, and I ask that our listeners and those that are watching also think about this. I don't need an answer from them. But having a very ground-shaking idea like the bottom-up approach to our economics that for the longest time has been a trickle-down one. You literally are reworking the foundation of how we actually have been administering state for about 50 years plus. How will you deliver something so heavily that way if immediately you've actually won an election, you go to the Supreme Court? And I don't want to get to a place where it looks like a poor workman is blaming his tools. But I would love Kenyans to actually also to engage me in this, just to think through that after you have won the presidency, it takes you a year fighting an opposition that does not recognize or does not accept the results of IEBC, that does not even accept the verdict that has gone to the highest court, which is the Supreme Court. And that during that particular time, the economy is actually assailed. In 2023, we wasted a lot of time with businesses being closed. We wasted a lot of time in courts. Every time people were closing their businesses, however much we wanted to actually deliver. Under such circumstances, we also had a drought that worked through 2021, crossing into 2022, and then we had a famine. It's one thing that we don't want to talk about. Just remember that we hadn't even properly gone through the COVID-19, effects of COVID-19. So, even if you are a magician, it was impossible for Kenya Kwanza to deliver on its promises in 2023. Then come 2024. As you start to stabilize, you've reached out to the opposition. Now you are trying to work out. God has been gracious, given you a little bit of rains and things are working well. Then now you have got the Gen Z demonstrations, courtesy of the effects of a 2023 that did not work well, by the way. You had a 2023 that was totally not well utilized. So 2024 has got the effects. You have got young people coming to the streets. And as of right, by the way, you cannot blame that because they don't have jobs, a few things that weren't working out well. Then you come up with a finance bill that tries to correct 2024 so that you try and catch up. Then you have got a 2024 that I actually define as a mad year where nothing works. We are at a place where we literally have patched up things to keep running. We do not have a finance bill in place. We are trying to actually fix that now. The other day, we've taken care of the revenue side by working on the tax amendment laws. All that is actually an attempt at patching up to actually have a functional, because how do you run a country? You run a country by a budget. Have we really had a budget that actually is functional? For this particular year, for the longest time, we've not had that working. So, again, I want to invite Kenyans to ask them this. Even if the Kenya Kwanza was a team of magicians, it is not possible to deliver on everything we promised. I will be coming to what we promised and what we've delivered. It is impossible for Kenya Kwanza to deliver everything against a background of 2024. It's difficult to actually say that with all that happened, even without a finance law in place, without a proper budget in place, that you still expected Kenya Kwanza to actually deliver. And that is why a lot of the things the president said are now being qualified as lies, because from a reductionist thinking, it is so simple, because the definition of a lie is very basic. Anything that looks like truth is a lie. But then against a backdrop where the president has actually made a declaration or a promise, and with the prevailing circumstances, it doesn't work. What does it, if you have got a reductionist mind, it is very basic. That comes off as a lie. So, having considered that, how will we deliver with a 2023 that looks like what I've actually defined? How will Kenya Kwanza have delivered in 2024 against a backdrop that I've defined? And it's still fresh in our mind. How will Kenya Kwanza have delivered under such circumstances? But then look at what we have done. Number one, against the prophecies of economists, against everything, Kenya did not go under. We did not default on our debts, for example. That we actually have come from a very bad situation where we have stabilized prices over a few basic commodities. It does not mean that everything has been sorted with that. That we must also be bold enough and tell Kenyans that a little bit we've worked out on the inflation, we've worked out on the prices of basic commodities, but we also know that affordability is not accessibility. That whereas it can actually be affordable. Like for example, when I lived in New York, I would see that cars, sometimes even a new car would be just $2,000 US, $2,000. That's not a lot of money. So it's affordable, but if you are a Kenyan, is that accessible to you? It's not. So we also understand and we appreciate that whereas a few commodities, the basic commodities have gone down, for some Kenyans, it's not accessible to them. So it's affordable, yes, the prices has gone down, but is it accessible to them? It's not. So we are at a place where we must balance all these things. And that is why I'm inviting Kenyans to a place where we have a conversation. That the government you have, constitution, we are a constitutional democracy. You cannot ask this constitution to defend you and protect you, and you do not want this constitution to also defend the people who have constitutionally been elected and also take care of this particular regime. So it gives both ways. So from where we are as a constitutional democracy, it's important that we speak to each other. There is no winner in a situation, and like Dr. said here, that when a country goes down, there's no winner. So we are at a place where we must talk to each other, not talking at each other. We've done enough of that. For most of this year, we have done that. We've made our point. And just before you forget, probably, we need to send this home so that then Kenyans out there also can look at this conversation as an important part of it. We told the president to relook at his cabinet. He did. There is no president since independence who actually reworked his cabinet, courtesy of the people going to the street. It's never worked. That is a score we made as Kenyans.
Perhaps how he did it, the outcome he gave the new cabinet may not have been very satisfactory.
Look at this. We elected a man who has got, first of all, you must actually be a person who has got all your faculties correctly to be elected. So we expect the president to use wisdom, to use to also think he is also at discretion to come up with a team that can deliver for him. But I can tell you, George, that there has never been a time when the whole cabinet went home, courtesy of the people asking that. Policy has changed drastically, by the way. We've done away with the First Lady's kitty. We've changed policy. We threw out the entire budget. And the budget is legitimacy. That we listened to the people and did away with the entire budget. We're talking about the finance bill going home, the entire of it. That is too much of progress that we cannot then actually try to trivialize that. Unless we just want to keep on going, I would ask to what end?
Okay.
Yeah.
Indeed. Dr. Again, Dennis Othembo asks, in the current constitution, there's no opposition. What we have is the majority and minority in parliament, so the whole parliament should provide oversight to the executive. Parliament has failed us. Whereas there is the outlook on the executive, there is also parliament that has a section of Kenyans who say has failed them. Looking at 2024 and perhaps now as we enter the home stretch of this conversation, what would be some of the ills that Parliament would need to resolve to gain confidence of the public? Because they have also said, given a chance, they would send these guys home.
I think for the record, let's also agree that Kenyans are known globally for the longest to be very tolerant people. Kenyans are known to be very hardworking. I think Kenya is one of the countries that has the best human capital anywhere in the world, at least in Africa. And to that extent, the Kenyan people are people who can easily be engaged, provided that their leadership gives reciprocal. Now, we have a scenario, yes, we have the three arms of government. You have the judiciary, you have the executive, you have the parliament, both the National Assembly and Senate, who are supposed to be checking the excesses of the executive. In the county governments, the assembly, the county assembly is supposed to be checking the excesses of the executive. But having said that, the architecture of our constitution is such that there's a ruling coalition. Yes. That forms, in a good situation like we have in Kenya today, whichever way it happened, you have the executive that also has the majority in the parliament, to which extent that executive can be able to have a very collaborative approach to push the agenda they want, the legislature they want, using that majority. So to that extent then, the parliament is not only checking the excesses of executive, but it is also helping the executive to achieve its goals. And what has happened is that not only does the majority in parliament found themselves in a situation where, and that is why the people are very upset with them, that they would send them home, because they ended up being a choir where the song is, the soloist is the executive, and they just repeat without really scrutinizing. And in that way, instead of helping the executive, they have failed the executive, and they have failed the people, because some of the bills, like now we are in this conversation about social health authority and the chief. Just the other day we see them being educated, and yet they are the ones who pass the law. And you actually get to a point and wonder, and this is what people are wondering. So what did you pass? Why didn't you ask for those questions? So that in the end, we have social health that ought to have helped the people, but it is still requiring some work as we go through, which the parliament would have helped to tell the executive, you've come up with a good bill, you've come up with a good idea, can we improve it this way? But instead, they just said, yes, yes. And to that extent, the people see the current parliament as not having played its role. Its role to speak for the people. Okay. Isn't it true? Although we are saying democracy, somebody is saying democracy is not at stake. It is at stake to the extent that right now, the real check is not in the parliament. The real check now, we saw the other day the religious leaders coming out strongly. We have seen the civil society coming out strongly and offering what one would consider to be a reasonable, positive critique, which is helpful. We would like a scenario where in future we have a parliament. Yes, a parliament that supports the executive, but the member of parliament is free to make independent decision, to positively critique, read the bill, instead of coming to say just yes. Okay. So we need people who read the bill who will pass it.
Let's go to translate. Let's pick Bichachi first, because
I just wanted to correct something, because when Mark comes in, his delivery might actually make this point be lost. The whole idea that somehow the legislature has been captured is actually a faulty one. The legislature is independent. let's also give MPs
that independence has been argued. Let's pick Bichachi because
you will allow me to actually come back to that.
Yes, you will come back to it in your closing remarks. Bichachi, in the closing remarks, compound your statements perhaps with what you'd like to see 2025. Maybe one of those things, if not a list, very, very briefly, of what you'd like to see in the new year.
Well, first and foremost, the very fact that my good friend can mention the civil society, the religious leaders have come very strongly to critique, that is democracy. Democracy is not just about parliament. And I understand what he's saying because I do agree that it is quite embarrassing for parliamentarians to go for training on a bill that they passed themselves. I think all of them should have handed in the resignation letters that day, especially all of those who had voted yes. So that point is home. 2025 moving forward, what do we want to see? Number one, I agree with Arnold. Kenya needs to talk and needs to have a serious conversation about where we want to go. And that brings me back to the point about the positive tension. I want 2025 to be another year where the government and the people come together to pull on the same side to make sure things are better, to make sure SHA is working. I want another runway at the airport. I want the potholes in Nairobi fixed. I want to be able to afford things when I go to the supermarket. I want not to be embarrassed as a father when I tell my kids we can't afford these things. So these things are universal. I think even the president's own children desire these things, and therefore it is not a partisan statement when we say that what we want together as a country is the people are saying we want a better country. The government is saying it's delivering a better country. So we agree on what we want. Now, can that movement actually be actualized in our pockets, in our governance, and in the accounting systems that keep our government in check?
Okay. Compounding closing remarks, very briefly as well.
So I just needed to say this, that there's a notion, and I will call it actually unapologetically, I will call it a very reductionist notion, that Parliament does not know what it's doing. Parliament actually has got some of the best minds when it comes to the technical people. Number one, the Parliamentary Budget Office, the PBO, quite a competent department. If you look at their research department, I do not think that there is quite a place where you get a glut of people who can actually do proper policy and legislative research. So Parliament is also making decisions based on information. And a lot of times, by the way, it's actually scientific information. The problem with scientific information is that sometimes it's not popular. So you're going to get people who will actually argue with what is quite, let me call it populist lines. And those are very easy, especially when you get out there. And that is why for us, I think it's time we invited people to town halls,
yes,
to talk to each other, because now from where Kenya is, you cannot talk policy and politics in political rallies. It's one way, it's no longer making sense. That can only polarize situations. You cannot have the whole country in a boardroom, but then at least we can actually have proper structured policy and sometimes political conversations with depth in town halls. Okay. So I just needed to say that in defense of Parliament, there is this notion that somehow Parliament is made up of people who do not know what they are doing. Somehow, people, almost 350 for the National Assembly, 349 of them, I think 2 of them are now away. Let's talk about just 347 of them. Plus the Speaker, you can actually talk about 348. All those people cannot be mad people to sit down and make decisions that totally are far removed from data. It's the situation might not really be good. Sometimes data is not really appealing. So Parliament is entirely not mad. It's important to say that. Okay. And when they make these decisions, they're not making it at the behest of the executive. And also, even where the executive asks Parliament to back its policies, it's also data-driven. The executive also represents the people. In the executive, we do not have people whose business is actually to go and torture Kenyans. That's not what we are doing. Sometimes, in the long stretch, you might not see or actually appreciate what we are trying to do. But I can tell you 100%, Kenya Kwanza means well. Kenya Kwanza knows exactly what it's doing. It's not popular at the moment to do some policies, but those policies do not come from a place where somebody wants to torture Kenyans.
Okay.
So as my closing remarks will be this way.
Yes.
Dear Kenyans, difficult as this year has been, difficult as 2023 was, and hard as the situation might be, I want to invite all of us as we go to the midterm to have a national conversation. You raise your point, allow government to also, we on this other side, to also tell you our story, because it's about storytelling. What they are talking about is that they are telling one side of the story. There are more than one side to a story. We need to talk to each other.
Okay.
And as we speak to each other, that is how we actually are going to heal the country. That is how we are going to fix the economy. Because even the Constitution itself allows for public participation. That public participation cannot be one way. Those of us on the government side actually have to also speak to you, and you also speak to us. It has to be cyclic for us to move forward.
Doctor, you get the last word in just a minute, please.
Yes. The book I read called the Bible says that you shall know them by their fruit. We look forward to seeing a year where the government walks the talk. We've had too much talk. We need to see the fruit.
Okay.
We need to see in 2025 where a patient goes to the hospital, is a member of a chief, and gets the service that they need so that they don't have to talk. We do not need to hear that it is working. We want people to say
it is working.
It is working because they are receiving. We look forward, waiting too late to get grade 9 classrooms done. We look forward that in January, the JSS students who are in grade 9 in our public schools, they will go there and find a classroom. So we look forward, I think as Kenyans, we would like our government to work for us, and we as the people participate as required. Finally, we look forward to Parliament, members of Parliament, whichever way you are elected as a member of Parliament, to represent the people and to articulate what it is the people want, where it requires you to check the executive, check the executive. Where it requires you to support the executive agenda, support it. Then we can have a working nation.
A working nation.
Wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Asante sana. I've been speaking to Dr. Moses Mwangi, political commentator, Arnold Maliba, head of policy and public affairs at UDA. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us in studio. Joining us virtually from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, has been Mark Bichachi, an analyst and communications strategist. Danish, you say, hey, Maringa, this government needs the likes of Maliba who are ready to admit where they have failed and promise to improve. Kudos, Maliba. Someone says here on SMS, Hassan Mukuria from Naivasha, problem with Kenyans is stupid politics. We hope to have a good and wonderful 2025. That has been the show tonight. My name is George Maringa. As always, stay safe and be kind to one another. On sign language, earlier on, we did have Calvin McCory. Good night from Nairobi.